Today we will be learning about ancient civilizations. Ancient means a long time ago, like thousands and thousands of years ago. To show exactly how long ago these ancient civilizations came about, I will be using a timeline. Timelines represent different periods of time all along a line. This long black line represents time. So if you go further back this way, you're going back in time, and if you go further towards this way, you're going forward in time. So on our timeline, you can see here is right now, and here is where you all were born. Here is where Mix Hully was born, and here is where Mrs. Both was born. And a bit farther back, you can see when Martin Luther King Jr. led the Civil Rights Movement. Now, if we go much farther back in time, we can see when Columbus arrived at the Americas. But to get to the time of ancient civilizations, we have to go even farther back past times of kings and queens, past 3,000 years ago, past 5,000 years ago, way back here to 6,000 years ago when the first human civilizations began. But wait a minute, what exactly is a civilization? Well, to answer that, we have to go even farther back in time, back before civilizations, and even before farming was invented. We don't want to go too far back, or else we might accidentally run into the dinosaurs. Oh no, too far, turn around. Okay, where were we? Right about here. 20,000 years ago, to a time before civilizations and even before humans knew how to farm, a time when all humans lived as hunter-gatherers. You see, now the way that pretty much all humans get our food is from farming. Farmers grow crops and raise animals, then these crops are put on a truck and transported to a grocery store where we buy it for food and eat it. For us, it all starts with farming. But a long time ago, before farming was invented, humans lived as hunter-gatherers. This means that they got their food by hunting animals for meat, like by shooting a bow and arrow at a duck or catching a fish with a spear, or by gathering plants, like by picking berries from a bush or taking nuts and fruit that had fallen from trees. Because of this lifestyle, small groups of humans stuck together and migrated all over the land, moving from place to find more food to hunt and gather. They were nomads, meaning they never lived in one place for very long. They kept moving around in order to follow wherever they could find food. Since they were always moving from place to place, their tribes stayed small to easily manage this nomadic lifestyle. Now, if we had to fit everything we've been talking about so far on this timeline, it would look like this. Here is right now. So then here would be when Columbus first arrived at America, and here is where our ancient civilizations began, and right before that was when humans first learned how to farm. So that means that for all of this time of human life on Earth, from when the very first humans existed to when they finally learned how to farm, humans lived as hunter-gatherers. Did you know that the first humans to ever exist originated in Africa? But because we were hunters and gatherers, we began to move all over. Some groups of humans migrated north into Europe and Russia, some east into Asia. Some tribes even traveled all the way over from Russia across to Alaska and down to the Americas to eventually make up the groups of people we now know as the Native Americans. How did they cut across from Russia to Alaska if this was all ocean? Well, that is because at the time that they migrated over, it wasn't ocean. All of the water was actually frozen into ice, bridging the land together, allowing them to walk across. This is because they migrated over during a time called the Ice Age. The Ice Age was a period of time that began about 30,000 years ago and lasted until about 12,000 years ago. It was a time when the temperature of the Earth dropped drastically and large parts of the world were completely covered in ice. Imagine what Antarctica looks like, and then imagine if half the world looked like that. Places where there was once water and land turned fully into ice, including the water between what is now Russia and Alaska. This is what allowed the Native Americans to migrate across from Russia into Alaska and eventually all the way down into the Americas. But you are already experts on the Native Americans, so we are going to go all the way back over here, right next to Africa, to the Middle East, the place where the first ever human civilization began, to ancient Mesopotamia. About 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age began to end. The world's temperature started to warm up again, and all of the ice began to melt into water. This water created important rivers that flowed and flooded into lands, creating areas where plants could easily grow. Two of these rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, were part of ancient Mesopotamia. These rivers flowed through an area that was mostly desert, but the rivers made it so the area around the water became an ideal environment for plants to grow. The humans who lived in this area started to realize how easily plants could grow in these areas by the water. 10,000 years ago, it was in this area of land between these two rivers that humans began to see a different way of getting food. They learned how to use this rich, wet soil to control the native plants and produce grains like wheat predictably year after year. They no longer needed to keep moving from place to place in order to find food. Instead, they could stay in the same area for many seasons and even many years. Because they were staying in the same place and because they had more food available, their population grew. Throughout the years, more and more people lived there, and their village became bigger and more complex. Eventually, about 6,000 years ago, these villages had grown so big and become so complex that they had turned into the world's first civilization, ancient Mesopotamia.